Why should we hire you in this position? That question has come through from another attender here, Lillian. Um, that's a great thing to be ready for. That's one of the questions to be prepared to answer. Really, every question is asking you that. Every question is trying to learn a little bit about what is it that you bring that is valuable to us. And I've got some really good supporting commentary to that, and I'll get to that. Let me forget, but I'll get back to that. But really, it's about knowing what value you bring, understanding the role before you go in, studying the job description, looking for what their key requirements are, and being prepared to show how you can add value. Always adding value. A lot of people misinterpret a question like, why should we hire you for this position, as in, why do you want this position? That's a completely different question. Yet it's amazing how many people reverse it. And I have literally asked people, why should we hire you for this position? And they've told me what's in it for them. Well, it's good for my career. I wanted to do this for a long time. I've really been interested in this company. Okay, that's great for you. That's a question, though, that should be, why do you want to work here? Why should we hire you means you should be able to identify some things. And my best advice on that, and I'll have this in writing for you in some documents that I'm going to send everybody after, but is identify some key things that relate to the job and then support them. Whenever possible, support your answers with an example. Anybody can say anything. If I said, Michael, why should we hire you? And Michael says, well, because I'm a hard worker and I'm a good team player and a strong leader and I'm really smart. And that was the answer. I'd be like, okay, those are things you're saying. How about give me an example? I'm a strong team player. I'm adaptable. And, I understand these systems. For example, on my most recent team, blah, 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 give some context, some proof of your claim to be a strong team player, just for argument's sake. For adaptability, well, just recently when the whole world stopped spinning on its axis and we all had to suddenly start working from home, here's how I reconfigured my approach to work and how I rallied my troops and how I became really capable of working virtually. Okay, that sounds like adaptable to me. That's proof right there, and so forth. So I always tell people, if you get asked that question, because it is a common one, it's on most sort of top 10 common interview question lists and things like that, to be prepared to have 2 or 3 strong, reasonable, and honest things, and then give them a bit of support. Identify them and support them. In the end, people are going to forget everything you told them, but they won't forget what? How you made them feel. What impression you left on them. I guarantee that's the case every time. I never remember everything someone tells me. It's impossible. You can't listen and write down everything at the same time. Often people make the mistake of going on long tangents and going off topic, another big mistake. But what I do remember at the end of an interview, at the end of the day, when I'm revisiting my interview notes or doing a kind of a debrief, is I remember, oh yeah, I got the sense that person was this, this, and that, and the positive things, or worse, the negative things. Tell me about yourself is another popular question that's been submitted here by someone too. And for those of you who were joining us yesterday, we touched on this, and it is a tough one. And it's a dreaded one, but it's the one that you need to be the most ready to answer, because that's usually the first question or the first couple of questions or something along those lines that you will be asked. So how do you prepare for that? Anybody want to throw in an idea, a thought, or suggestion? I'd really love to hear from anybody. If you want to unmute and make a comment before I do all the talking here. Anyone? Okay, nobody. Well, I'll continue then. So the reason this is a hard question is because it's a real guessing game about what is it about me that you want to know. Some people think it means, okay, I started working here in this job and these were my tasks, and then I went to that job and those were my tasks, and then I went to this job and that's not at all it. That's boring and it's not useful. They've read your resume, they've seen your work history. Some people think it means about too much of their personal stuff. And sometimes they're looking for a little bit. They want to know what kinds of things motivate you or interest you, but you want to stop short of talking too much about your personal life at the beginning of an interview, um, because you're going to go off topic there. You want to be able to just identify some things that are short and sweet, that connect to your ability to add value or to fit in with that company. And part of that is in the preparation. You should always be prepared for an interview by knowing who the company is, what they do, what they stand for, what their values and beliefs are, anything like that. Anything you can learn online or by asking people. And think, how do I connect to that first and foremost? Because that's going to be part of my proposition here is, what do I bring to the team? What value? How do I fit? Anybody can fit anywhere. It's got nothing to do with what your personal interests are or what your background is. It's got more to do with what your values are, and how you contribute and collaborate with people. So for example, if you're looking at an organization whose website is heavily populated with information about their community participation, things they do to add value to the community, and the kind of causes that they support, if that resonates with you, well, what a great opportunity then to talk about that. It's like, well, I'm very much community-minded person who has, high energy, high motivation. Again, throw some examples in there, and say, and I'm, also really, just like you're a business, I really believe in supporting certain causes, and notice that you do as well. So I think there's a great fit there, and just connecting those dots wherever you can. But again, authentically, always authentically. I start every interview preparation discussion with people the very same way. And that way is, first and foremost, who's the easiest? Ask them. And I'm going to ask you as a group here, who is the easiest person in the world to be? I'll wait for answers. I'm not saying anything till I see some answers or hear some answers. Right. Ourselves, me, yourself. Correct. If you're being yourself, then you're not acting. But if you're trying to be a caricature of yourself, or you're trying to present yourself with this facade of a person that isn't who you normally are, it will show. Not only will it show, but it'll be harder to maintain, because then you have to be in this mode, and every thought and every comment has to be planned and scripted, and that doesn't go very well. But when you're yourself, you're speaking from within. You're speaking from the heart. You're telling people how you really feel about things, and it happens way more fluidly. You're more relaxed. You're not tense because you're, trying to be this really professional kind of idealistic employee from the 1950s. You're being you. And it then turns into a much better conversation. Much better. They're going to learn more about you, even by the unspoken things. Even just in the way that you project things, the look in your eye when you talk about something that really does interest you, rather than this contrived, planned out, scripted thing that you went in with. There's a huge difference. Believe me, I see it every single day. And one of the things that people are trying to do in an interview, from the interviewer, from the hiring manager perspective, is they're trying to picture you in that job. They're trying to picture you on that team with those people. So in order to do that, they want to get a sense of who you are. They don't want that mystery. If there's a feeling, and I have these debrief conversations on the regular, where a good debrief is like, I have a pretty good feeling that the person we met today is the person who we'll see in 6 months, in 6 years. We got a good connection there. We felt, keyword, felt that they were being honest and sincere and authentic. Versus, I'm not so sure about that one. It seemed like it was just too predetermined, a little bit too scripted. I'm not sure if I'm going to see that, who's going to actually turn up here to work, right? But also, when you're just being yourself, things come out much naturally. And a common comparison or analogy I use with people when I'm helping them ready for their interview is, when you think about a conversation that you have with a friend, the family member, someone you're close to, someone you're comfortable with, And you know, those conversations that you have that maybe they go for an hour, maybe longer, who knows, but you cover all kinds of things. And at the end of it, you feel something, you feel good. You feel a little bit like a weight's been lifted if you talked about something that was difficult, needed to be discussed, and it had a positive resolution, or just a really good connected conversation. Either way, it doesn't matter. You didn't plan that conversation. You didn't plan ahead of time and say, okay, for the first 11 minutes, I'm going to talk about this, and you're going to say this, and I'm going to say that. So why can't you have that in an interview? You can. You just have to make sure you stick to being concise, though. You don't want to over talk on things. You don't want to take it too far, but you do want to have that same access to free flowing thoughts, because the physiological reaction when people get uncomfortable or nervous before an interview, which I would say is most people by far, even me. I mean, as it's been mentioned, I've conducted many, many, many thousands of interviews. I've been interviewed quite a few times. I still, although I'm comfortable in an interview, I still have to kind of go through the mental preparation and the planning and the same things that I preach to people, I have to do myself. And beginning with doing everything possible to make yourself comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable, you can't be yourself. If you can't be yourself, you're going to freeze. And I know that everybody, and I don't think there's a single person who's exempt from this. Has anybody gone to interviews and walked out even just one time feeling like, wow, I bombed that interview? That was terrible. Why didn't I say this? Or why did I say that? Or why didn't I have a good example? Or if I just simply froze. An interview can be like an exam. You can cram for an exam all night long and memorize certain pieces of the coursework and hope that's what's on the exam, and go through these things in your head right to the second you get your exam paper. They hand it to you. You don't know the first answer to the first one. And what happens? Your brain just freezes on you, right? You just become, you can barely spell your own name. If you're not prepared right for an interview, if you're not calm and relaxed and comfortable, that's exactly what happens. Or people think, oh, I don't need to prepare for an interview. I'm really good at that. Well, some people are, like 1% of the population, but most really aren't. I think they are. And my test on people who I think are overconfident on an interview is I'll just say something, okay, great, tell me a joke, and then watch their face go blank. It's not like they don't know a lot of jokes. They probably know hundreds. Can you think of even one at the time? No. Why? Because you don't know what my sense of humor is, or you don't have one at the ready, or. It's like when you interview, give me an example of a time when, and I'm, the documentation I'll send you is going to expand on this greatly. Because of our limited time, I don't want to just go on our slides. But, you have to have examples, and they have to relate to the question. It doesn't have to be, precisely exactly the same, but if it shows the same attribute, then it works. And sometimes you can get asked, give me an example of a time when, whatever, blank. And you can think, and I see this again all the time, where it's like, well, that happens all the time. That happens every day in my job or every week. Okay, so can you think of one example? And if they weren't ready, they can't. So you have to anticipate and think of what kinds of questions are likely to be asked in this interview. But more importantly, and this is really important, what kinds of things are they going to be looking for? Because the questions could be asked so many different ways to learn the same thing about you. So you can break it into categories: skills-based questions, behavioral-based questions, personality, fit. Well, the only way you can answer a personality or a fit question is just to be yourself and be comfortable. And for some people, that's a little hard. I get it. It's hard if you're naturally introverted person. It's hard if you're not comfortable with your English language skills, or if you're just, not much of a talker. But if you think of it as just a conversation, but one in which you're showing value and how you can fit, which is a little bit of extra push, it's a lot easier than if you think of it as an interrogation. Nobody wants to be interrogated. Nobody wants to sit and feel like they're being judged or assessed, or like they're looking for your flaws, because they're not. You will never get an interview unless they want to hire you. I'm going to say that again. You will never get an interview unless they want to hire you. Why would anybody want to waste their time to interview somebody with no thought of, we'd like to hire this person? I sure don't want to waste my time. Often I have people at the table whose time in terms of salary costs is a heck of a lot more than mine. They don't want to waste their time. They want you to confirm to them that you're a good fit. They want you to confirm to them that what they think they know about you is true, or what they think you can do is a fact. Or in some cases, it's a little bit more of a leap when, okay, maybe your experience isn't precise to what they had posted, but they saw enough there that they were interested in. So really understand what it is that they are looking for on a broader basis. You can learn the skills, you can learn the tasks, and show them who you are by being you. Now there's a question here I've got from another person, which is another common interview question, and it's one that that I personally loathe. I personally can't stand, but some people still like to ask it, and that question is, what are your weaknesses? Well, if there was ever a cliche interview question, that one's like the supreme cliche interview question. And you know what usually happens, and this is one of the reasons why I don't like asking this, is that I can start writing down the cliche answer before it even comes out of somebody's mouth. Cliche answers to that would include something ridiculous like, oh, I never know when to stop working. I don't know how to delegate. I'm a perfectionist. All of these things. Like, really? Is that really a weakness? Do you think as an employer, I think, what's wrong with that employee? Oh, they work too hard. Oh, their work's too perfect. No, of course not. And that's not what I'm looking for. And that's not what any employer is looking for when they ask that question, or similar questions like, tell us about when you made a mistake. They don't want to know what you're not good at. They do not want to know what you're not good at. They want to know how you overcome things that you need to be better at. So my favorite example on this to illustrate this point on the what is your weakness question is as follows. So what is your weakness, Isaac? Well, if I said, well, I'm not very good at Excel, and just left that as my answer, move on to the next. Well, that's not much of an answer, especially if it was clear in the job description that you needed to have, proficiency with Excel. If they said, what is your weakness, Isaac? And I said, well, in my current job, or my most recent job, not long ago, I was given some new tasks that involved creating spreadsheets that had pretty advanced formulas in them and things I'd never done, like pivot tables or VLOOKUPs and things that were new to me. And I had no idea really where to start. But I didn't want to slow anyone down or have my coworker do it for me or have to be shown multiple times or anything. So what I did about that, and what I continue to do, is I've gone onto YouTube in my own time and had some tutorials on some more advanced functions of Excel in practice. And it's coming a long way. I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. And I'm confident that any requirement you have here with Excel, I'll be able to nail it, but just may take a little bit of that extra practice. Isn't that a better answer? Sure it is. What impression what are they going to remember about that in the end? That I'm not good at Excel? No. But that I take the initiative to learn what I need to learn in my job. That's the key part of that. That's really what attribute an employer is looking for if they ask you about a weakness. Sometimes it might be a little bit more practical or pragmatic. It might be just, what about this job might be a little bit more difficult for you, so that they have a good sense ahead of time of how to approach training. Okay, that's a little bit different. But overall, as a flat out blank question, if someone asks you, what are your weaknesses? Be ready with a couple of them, real ones. But then make sure that you convert that conversation to what you are doing about it or what you did about it to get over it, because that's what is the key there. That's the impression that you're going to leave. That's what they're going to remember. They'll forget the story. They'll just remember the impression being, okay, this person takes initiative. Similarly, If somebody asks you, tell me about a mistake you made in your work. This is a common question, or one that could have been avoided. They don't want to hear about something minor. They're not looking for you to reveal something so they go, oh, we're not going to hire Isaac. He screwed that up. They are wanting to know how accountable you are. So that question could be asked 100 different ways. But like I said earlier, if you know in advance the kinds of things, or you anticipate the types of things that they want to learn about you, you can kind of prepare that and think about that. And then that question could be asked so many different ways to learn that particular feature about you. And one way of asking how accountable are you, or how diligent are you, is about asking about a mistake you made. It's also about asking how honest you are. It's checking your integrity. So I encourage people, like if you went to the CEO of the world's largest organizations, you went to Bill Gates and said, Bill, tell me about a mistake you made. If he had time, he would tell you 1,000 different things, and he wouldn't stop. So why be ashamed of having made mistakes in the past? We all have. I've made many. There's some that I look back and shake my head with disbelief of the screw ups I've done, and will continue to. That's just part of human nature. So be ready with that. Talk about a real mistake that you made, not just something like, oh, I once sent an email to the wrong person because I wasn't looking carefully and the names were similar. Okay, well, that happens. But something significant. But more importantly, the part that matters is talking about what you did about it. So identify your mistake, but then describe what you learned from it, what you did about it, how much, who did you inform, how quickly did you respond, how much ownership did you take, and what did you do to prevent it from happening again? Because what they're trying to do is not learn about, okay, what's your history of screw ups? We're going to put a risk factor on you. They want to know that when you make a mistake with us, because they know you're going to, just like they did, just like everybody will, when you do, what is the likely way that you will respond? Are you going to be somebody who hopes that nobody notices the mistake and sweeps it down and, then it causes problems down the line? Or are you going to be that person who realizes it, takes accountability, takes action, and corrective action on it? That's what they're going to remember. They're going to forget the story. The story could be extreme. It could be burn down the restaurant you worked in when you were 19 because you forgot to turn off the fryers when you left. But if your story talks then about what you did about it afterward, they're going to forget the story more likely and just remember, okay, this guy really responded well. This person really, owned it. So don't be embarrassed or afraid to talk about uncomfortable things like that. You can talk about the worst thing and feel proud about it if you're talking about how you responded to it, because that becomes the focus. That becomes the emphasis. So if you have any other questions here, I've been rambling for a while here. No, okay. So let's talk about things that you need to do in preparation. And I'm not going to pull up my slides because we'll get too stuck on those. I'm going to send them to you as well as a worksheet. But there's certain things that you need to do ahead of time. Why don't I poll the crowd here, keep everybody involved here, who'd like to throw some ideas in of what they would do or what they would recommend people do prior to the interview. So you've got the interview booked. What now? What kinds of preparation would you consider? I'll open up the conversation board here, or if you want to talk on mic, please do. Practice, research, okay, yeah. Both very good. Research again, research, okay. So I do agree. That's the first thing that you should do. You need to know what it is you're interviewing for and with whom. Ideally, if you can, even to know a little bit about the interviewer. Less important, but still valuable. But really, it's about knowing the job as best you can from what you understand of it and knowing who the company is, because that's going to determine the types of things that you're likely going to be asked about, the types of things that they are going to be looking for. So you can be prepared and have your examples and thoughts at the ready. and also different ways that you might be able to connect yourself to that. So when you research a company, the obvious ways are, going to the website and looking, but you can also even sometimes find good information on sites like Glassdoor or even Indeed. Glassdoor is probably the better when it comes to the number of reviews of an organization. But just keep in mind that it's kind of like TripAdvisor. I don't know if any of you are familiar with TripAdvisor or have used it. Probably some have, but people will go to a site TripAdvisor or similar and read reviews of a hotel, for example, before they decide which hotel to book. And there might be all kinds of reviews, but I look for a pattern. If I see a pattern where 15 out of the 20 reviews I wrote said something about the hotel had a terrible smell or was very noisy or something unpleasant about it, well, seems to be a trend there and probably best to avoid. So if I'm looking at reviews of an employer, you might see some positive reviews, usually supplanted there by people who are in tight with the HR, but you're more likely to see bad reviews, because this just seems that most people who put reviews on sites like that are disgruntled former employees, and they want to take their frustration out by saying something unpleasant about that employer on the site. So it's still worth it to read, but you might find that there's a real pattern there of positivity, where it's like, hey, they support this culture, or this works out, or it's a very inclusive place, or something really great. And that just feeds and informs your opinion. It also helps you prepare. LinkedIn is a good suggestion as well, to see who works there, see if there's anybody who you might know there or be connected to, maybe get some insight. You'd be pleasantly surprised sometimes how even someone who you're connected with on LinkedIn, you don't necessarily know them. I mean, I've got 3,700 connections on LinkedIn or something like that. I sure don't know all those people. But if I were going to go for an interview and I saw 4 people who I'm connected to work at that place, I would send a note to those 4 people and just ask them plain, hey, can I steal a few minutes from you, or I just want to get a little bit of insight? I'm having an interview, and is there anything you can share with me, anything I could know about that? And somebody will, guarantee it. So that's always a good thing, but also really, looking carefully, don't lose that job description. If you've applied for a job, you really should actually cut and paste the job description to a savable document, because by the time you get called for an interview, chances are it's not on the website anymore. It's no longer available or accessible. So you have to go from memory about, okay, what were they looking for? I got the gist of it, but gee, I sure wish I had the whole job description. So if you have that there, you can go back and look at that again and highlight the things that look like they're the most important. What seems to be the strongest feature, competency, attribute, strength, whatever it is that they are emphasizing in that, and how do I align with that, and how can I sort of think in advance about what examples I might be able to share, what stories I might have that show that I can do that and do it well, and company culture as well. We talk about fit. Like I said, anybody can fit. Anybody can fit. Some people think, oh, I'm gonna, it's not about culture in terms of ethnicity or religion or country of origin or race or anything like that. It's not that type of culture. It means common things here. I do a lot of the hiring at Bow Valley College, most of it. And one of the things that I'm looking for are those characteristics about people. A big part of my job as a recruiter, or any recruiter's job, is not just identifying the best people and bringing them in, not just advising on hiring decisions, but also identifying those who look like they could be a risk. And by a risk, I mean, are they contradictory to the values and the culture of the organization? Are they somebody who's going to be disruptive or negative or problematic based on my impressions from how they interview? So it's about showing, like, knowing what their culture is or understanding it as best you can, and just playing on that a little bit. If like I said earlier, if it's about any sort of causes that they back as an employer, as an organization, connecting yourself to that cause or something similar, but being real. Don't just tell them what you think they want to hear. Be you, be real, and they'll see that you can fit there. Someone has suggested researching in social media. That can be a pretty good resource. You also have to, we could probably spend 2 hours talking about our own social media here, and that's a different conversation maybe for another day. But there's a lot of stuff there, and some companies will have, you can follow them on Twitter, you can follow them on Instagram, or even on Facebook, and almost certainly on LinkedIn. But just knowing what that is they do, what they sell, what they provide, what their service is, are they for profit, not for profit, knowing a little bit about the financials, or what do you want to bring with you? And that's maybe our next question here. We'll get back to that. And then what else have I got here on the questions and suggestions here? Showing up early so you have time to relax and get mentally prepared. I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely a staunch believer in being on time for an interview. And I don't mean showing up at 1 o'clock sharp when it's at 1 o'clock sharp, because that's cutting it a little bit close. But I also don't mean going too early. Sometimes people show up too early, and they think maybe that, oh, I'm going to show up a half hour early, and that's going to show how inspired I am, or how keen or eager I am, and they're going to be really impressed by that. But they probably aren't, because what happens, and again, speaking from experience, when people show up too early, it then makes the interviewer potentially feel rushed or uncomfortable. Maybe I've got other interviews coming and going, and I don't want to have that awkward exchange as I'm seeing somebody to the door whom I have just interviewed for the same job as the person who's sitting in the chair to come in to be interviewed for. It is uncomfortable, and it does create a bit of a challenge. The other reason, though, and this is from the candidate perspective, is if you show up too early, you're giving yourself a little bit too much time to get wound up again. You want to be there early enough to just decompress a little bit, go through in your mind a little bit about, okay, here we go, here's the things I want to remember to say, and get acclimatized perhaps to the environment. But if you're there for too long, then you feel really exposed potentially, especially if you're sitting in a high traffic, high visibility area and everybody sees you, and it actually gives you more time to get nervous. You don't want to undo all of the relaxing and calming things and preparation things that you've done at the last minute by either being late or by being too early. You want to be at your best. So my suggestion is between 10 and 5 minutes prior to the scheduled time is good. You can get there earlier, and if you want to make sure that you're in the right place, or that you're not feeling panicked and everything, but then don't check in at the point of check-in until 10 minutes to 5 minutes before. Give yourself a chance. Maybe you might need to use the restroom, or have a quick check in the mirror and make sure that you don't have half your lunch still in your teeth, or your lipstick on, or something like that gone off, or anything that could be a little bit embarrassing. And I see it all the time. You name it, I've seen it. Even check your fly. I've had people show up, everything's great, they've done a wonderful job, they're super prepared, they've got everything they need, and their fly is completely open. So, and the worst part is when they realize that too, and they realize you realize that, and then it's this awkward kind of discomfort because they're going to have to zip it up, and you can imagine. So you want to give yourself enough time to be refreshed, be ready. Make sure you don't need to use the bathroom, anything that's going to make you feel uncomfortable or distracted. You want your telephone, your cell phone off, not just on silent, not just on, certainly not on vibrate. You want it off and out of sight. Michael had asked me earlier in a private conversation, a real deal breaker kind of a thing. And, I probably should have used this as an example where I've had people whose phones have rang during interviews. Okay, not good, but you know what? If they quickly just, reach in, turn it off, don't even look at it, apologize, and be like, oh my God, I completely forgot to turn that off. That's not a problem. You forget about it pretty quick. But I have had people answer their phone that rang during an interview. And one, I kid you not, she's like, we're asking questions. We're well into the interview. Her phone starts ringing. Worse yet, it's some really goofy ringtone. And we get this. One sec. Hello? No. Oh, no, it's okay. No, I'm just in an interview. Oh, really? Oh. Guess what? She didn't get the job. But that's a true story. That kind of stuff is disastrous. But the reason I say turn your phone right off and out of sight isn't just because you don't want it to ring. Sometimes it's like just as annoying when it starts to vibrate. It's in a purse or a bag or even on the table face down, like zzz, zzz, and they're pretending they don't notice it, but everybody does, and it's really distracting. So just forget the phone. You don't need it when you're in there. Turn it off. What do you bring with you? This is a question. This is a polling question here. I know what I'm going to say, but I'd like to hear what all you folks would think. What are you going to show up with on the interview day? What are you going to have in tow? Give it a couple minutes here. Not seeing many things. Okay. Yeah. There we go. All right, now it's pouring in here. Excellent. So there's been a bunch of suggestions here, all of which are 100% accurate. I will share these with you without naming everybody. Of course, copies of your resume. The chances are that they already have copies ready to go, but they might not. Maybe they came rushing from one meeting to the next and didn't get to the printer. Or maybe they thought the other person was bringing the copies of their resume, or any list of reasons why. Sometimes they just don't have one handy. So it's great to have, at least 2 or 3 with you, depending on what the interview panel looks like. But don't offer them if you can see they already have them. Let it be known, they can see that you brought it with you. But if you can see it, like if they already have them, don't force it. Here, I've got a copy of a resume. Well, I've already got one. Thanks anyway. Then it does happen, and I get it, But just have it ready. It shows, of course, that you're organized. Again, one of the first impressions is how organized you are. Another thing that I strongly suggest is a notepad or a notebook and a pen or 2 pens in case one dies. Nobody ever is going to mind. No one. And it surprises me actually how often people ask. And I get it. It's respectful and it's being professional to say, do you mind if I take some notes, or I've got some notes, do you mind? Of course I don't. I encourage it. But, thanks for asking, I guess. But when someone shows up for an interview with me and they've got nothing in their hands, they've got no folder, no printouts, no materials of any kind, I get concerned. I don't have my doubts about the person. I get concerned for them. I get concerned thinking they're going to forget something, or something's not going to happen here because they didn't have it written down to remind them, or they didn't take a note on something. So it's great to have a notepad. No one's going to be able to read it. No one's going to be trying to see what you're writing down. But at the same time, you don't want to be head down and writing the whole time. You want to have, in the most succinct possible way, and I mean minimally, just some reminders, 2 or 3 word statements spread out throughout the page, so that if you get asked about something that you've thought, okay, I might get asked about this, or I might need an example about that particular topic, then one quick glance at it, you'll see it and you'll be able to take your eyes back off the page and make eye contact with them again and tell that story. It's a great little reminder tool. Or perhaps in the context of the conversation, they or the person interviewing you might say something that catches your interest that you might want to come back to. Write down 1 or 2 words really quickly, just as a reminder for afterward to go back. Similarly, have some questions that you may wish to ask written down so that you don't forget them. Because I don't see many interviews that don't end with, do you have any questions for us? That's sort of the official, okay, we're done. We'd like to answer your questions. I expect questions. Most interviewers expect questions. It's weird if somebody has none. There's so many different interpretations of somebody not having questions that could be right or could be wrong, but those are the impressions. Usually it's, does this person just figure they know it all? Or are they not, are they so uninterested that they don't even have some questions? You have to have some. You don't want to have a ton. You also want to be mindful of their time. So it's even better to say, yeah, I've got a couple. Perhaps maybe they answered the questions you had throughout the conversation, which is entirely possible. Then, I guess the forgivable thing is to say, I actually had some questions, but we were able to answer them before. You still want to have something in your back pocket, though. But it's got to have value. I've got some suggestions of questions that I'll send to you in the work document, but you got to have that. And it's the easiest thing to forget, because people sometimes, I had them and I totally forgot. Really? Yeah, that's what happens. What else have we got here? Copy of the job description. Good point there, especially if you highlight some of the key things, again, just to remind you of the talking points or coming back to your examples. And any evidence of things, like if you've done some good research, you don't have to like force it on them and say, look at all the stuff I've got and go through it. Things they already know about their company. But if they see that, you have it laid out just a little bit. Whether it's information, it depends entirely on the job, depends entirely on the company. But if you've got things like the information about their board of directors or their executive or their financials or something really neat about them that you learned printed off just so you can refer to and have some visible thing, that shows your research, that shows your investment in the company and the time. If you have examples of your own work that's relevant, well, that's fantastic. Whether it's a portfolio of things, depending again on the job, but something that you can share, some sort of show and tell. People like that. They may not necessarily give it a real thorough looking over at that time, but they like it because it just shows that interest. It shows that initiative, and it could be very relevant. Again, if you're, in graphic design, we expect to see examples of your work. That's simple. But even, if it's an administrative job, I think of an individual who interviewed and hired this past year, and for what was a fairly entry-level administrative position, but her skill set was well above what the job she was hired for. But she had really terrific examples of her work, and they didn't breach any confidentiality of her prior employer. There's a fine line between having examples of your work and showing things that are not your property or that are trade secrets or things that were not meant to be shared outside of that organization. So you have to be careful with that. But you still to show examples of your work, and that's really what it was. We could see these really nice spreadsheets. They looked very clean and clear and crisp. I didn't read the content. I didn't read each column and each row and try and put it all together. But I could see, okay, there's some proof that you know what you're doing and can talk about it a bit too. One person has suggested to have your references. I agree, if asked for. Sometimes it's a little bit awkward when people give you their references without you asking for them. It's a little bit presumptive, but nevertheless, it's always a good sign. Always a good sign if you are asked for your list of references. So have them ready and have them printed out. Don't just write them down or have them write them down or say, oh, can I email them to you later? Well, you can, but you're more organized and more proactive if you already have them with you. Let's see what else. Work samples, we've got that. And, being prepared with how you'll add value. Again, comes back to the big question, why should we hire you? Well, every question is sort of designed around that. Every question is really trying to learn some characteristic about you and ways every question is an opportunity to show how you add value. Every question is a way for you, maybe you bomb a question. You know, maybe you have a question that your answer, just stunk. It happens to everybody. You know, I like to talk about how many interviews I've done. Big whoop. But the reason it's of relevance in this context is that in all of the interviews that I have done, I have never, ever had one that I would say was 100%, where that person was from beginning to end perfection. Doesn't happen. Everybody stumbles. Everybody does something that they could have done better. Everybody. You know, some are better than others. Some people are great interviewers and horrible workers. Other people are horrible interviewers, but great workers. Unfortunately, when the market's competitive, you have to be a good interviewer. You have to leave good impressions. You have to show your value. You have to have them remember who you are at the end of the day and go, yeah, I liked what that person came across as. I believe in that person. Very important. Talk about things like attitude, having a smile. It really comes down to being sincere. There's a lot of conversation we could have just about how to shake a hand. There's a lot of conversation we could have about how long do you maintain eye contact with people at the table. And I get asked these questions all the time, right down to splitting the hairs here, like how should I sit? All these things. None of them matter. Because if you're comfortable, if you do the things to minimize discomfort and you prepare accordingly and you plan and you do mental preparation, you calm yourself down, you approach it as yourself with authenticity and interest and enthusiasm, then you're going to have a much better time of it. And you're not going to think about, how am I sitting? Is my posture good? Am I speaking too loud? Am I speaking too quietly? What you want to do is you don't want to be remembered as the person who nearly broke their hand with a firm handshake that was so firm or was so sweaty, or you don't want to be remembered as the person who had the ketchup stain on their shirt, or the fly was low, or that shout talked the whole time, or that didn't make eye contact, or who only gave one-word answers or two-word answers, or who talked too long and changed the subject and didn't answer a single question with any relevance. All of these things can go wrong. So much can go wrong. But if you plan accordingly, you're really lowering that risk. You're really minimizing it, because you're going to go in there and you're going to have a good conversation and you're going to connect, right? You're going to make that connection with the people at that table or the person at that table. They're going to see and feel who you are. Even if you have a coffee stain that happened on your shirt and you didn't notice, or even if, you spoke a little bit too softly or too loud, just be yourself. You can't go wrong that way. You can't, unless you don't prepare. And we've talked about the preparation, and I'll follow back all this up here. Someone else had brought in recommendation letters too. I would agree to an extent. They're helpful, but most companies don't accept a letter of reference or a letter of recommendation as a reference. They want to actually have a real reference conversation with somebody because it's more reliable. Question here. So we've got about 5 minutes left here. So maybe I'll just use this time to respond to questions here, because goodness knows, maybe you could tell already, I could talk about this topic for the rest of the day and still only be half done. So I'll reiterate that I've got lots of stuff to send you. So we're going to be gathering whoever email addresses would like to receive this information, the interview worksheet, copies of presentation I have, and some other stuff. We'll get that all to you. But the next few minutes here, I'd love to answer any specific questions anybody has. And I see someone has asked here about how many questions are usually asked in an interview session and how many minutes for the candidate to answer the question. Okay, that is actually a really good question. From what's typical, unless you're told otherwise, depending on the interview, sometimes there's a screening interview, whether it be a phone interview or the growing in popularity video screen interviews that some larger organizations are using. And by the way, I have yet to hear anybody say anything other than they hated doing it. A proper in-person interview, or for the next little while, video interview would be, it's usually about an hour. That's what you should expect, unless you're told otherwise. Sometimes they might specify, okay, we have 30 minutes. Okay, then you want to make sure that you stick to that. You don't be the person who runs it too long and takes up their time. As far as the number of questions go, that is really difficult to answer. It all depends on the type of question. Some questions are longer, some are a little bit more robust. But I typically, for a 1 hour interview, I usually have about 10 to 12 questions. And then that leaves also some time to answer questions. But here's what's important, folks. You want to be mindful of how long you talk for. You know, like I've done all the talking here this past hour, but that was the plan. But in an interview, I have it way too often where I know I've got 10 questions and 60 minutes to complete the entire interview, including their questions. And at the 30-minute point, I'm still stuck on question 1 or 2 with that person because they just keep talking and talking and talking, and they go way past the topic of the question, to the point where it's no longer relevant. And what the risk is most people who are listening are kind of thinking, okay, hurry up. We still have 9 more questions to go, and we can't have 15 minutes, 20 minutes per answer here. This is not going to work. There's basically, I wouldn't say you should dedicate a certain particular length of time to an answer. I think you should look at it more as being a, whatever it takes to address it, to identify what you're going to speak about briefly so that they know where you're going with it, and then support it. You hear about the STAR, situation, task, action, result technique, which I will, again, it's in writing that I'll send to you. That's a great way to stay on topic. Well, the situation was this, and here's what I needed to do, and here's how I did it, and here's the result. That's a great way to not only remember the key parts of your informative little mini story, but it's also a great way for the listener to really pick up the keys and know what you're talking about the entire time, so that it doesn't go off topic and then changing the subject 16 times. That doesn't work very well. A couple more questions we've got here. Is it important to follow up, or what's the right way to follow up after an interview? Yes, absolutely it is. And the best way is by email. And you could take that extra length and do a handwritten note or something like that, or a card. It's not going to really make a difference. People are quite happy to receive a short email. And I mean short email. I mean just a brief acknowledgement saying, something to the effect of, really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for your time. It's only added to my interest in this position, and I hope to hear from you at your convenience. Just a respectful acknowledgement that reinforces your interest. The best time to send it isn't right away. Sometimes I have it where I've finished an interview, and by the time I get back to my desk, I've already got this 3-paragraph long thank you email from that candidate. Well, clearly they had written it in advance, and as soon as I walked out the door, they hit send. That was a little bit too quick. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but that was too quick. The best time to do it is actually after hours, the day of the interview. Send that email in the evening, because the chances are that person, the first thing that they're going to do the following morning is, before they start their workday, is read their email. Most people start their day that way. And if they start their day with this, a pleasant note of acknowledgement and gratitude from somebody, that's a pretty good impression to start it off. Wouldn't you agree? So that's the best time to do it. If you want to send a card or something, sometimes people see that as being a little bit too much of a imposition, a bit too much of an obligation. Having some extra questions, even after 2-3, they ask for some more. So yes, you want to have some good questions, but meaningful. Don't ask questions for the sake of questions. Make sure they're questions that actually promote information and conversation. Does receiving a thank you email from a candidate after an interview impact your hiring decision? It doesn't influence it, but what it does is maybe it comes down to, again, I'm down to two people. Who am I going to pick? I like them both. Their qualifications are pretty much the same. Their interview was pretty much the same. There wasn't one real advantage from one over the other. They were both terrific. But maybe one of the two just sent that little extra note or something. That might tip the scale. So does it increase your chances? Marginally. Does it decrease the risk? Potentially. So in other words, it's a good idea. Best response for salary expectation. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm unfortunately, I'll have to make this the final question for now, but that's actually appropriate one because that's often a question that people have. So it's, again, when you're asked a salary expectation question, most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time, it's taken care of earlier in the process, or it should be. Especially if there's not something really clear, like there's no published list of salary grades for such a role, or you didn't put it down there. Then the reason for that isn't just to think, okay, how much do we have to pay this person, or how little, who's the cheapest candidate, and we'll go with the cheapest one. It's really more just to kind of get a sense of, are we even in the same playing field here? Because we don't want to get through 2 or 3 interviews with you and do reference checks and all these things only to make an offer that's not even close to what you're after. But what you want to do is you do need to have a number ready. As uncomfortable as that is, and as undesirable as that is, there is still that expectation that there's going to be a range. It has to be within what you think is realistic for that job. It should be realistic in relation to what you have been earning or were earning maybe in the same job, but you can't always look back at your last job as what you want, because maybe your last job or your current job was not your career job. It was a temporary interim thing, but you've made more doing something similar to what you're applying for. So you have to look at it that way too. But you want to make sure that you give a realistic range, but also that you add commentary to the effect of, I'm sure that if I'm the successful candidate, that you'll make an offer that is reasonable for both of us, or I'm really more interested in the opportunity. I'm not too concerned about the salary. I'm fairly flexible, but you got to know what your bottom line is too, because you don't want to waste your own time only to say, okay, they're going to offer. Let's just for easy math here. Let's say you're looking for between $70,000-$75,000 a year, something like that. And your bottom line is 65. You can't pay your bills if you don't make X amount. Then don't be unrealistic. Don't go to something that is well below what is sustainable for you. But stick to what you're looking for, so long as it's reasonable to what that job should pay. And don't think that if you go in as the cheapest candidate that it's going to give you the great advantage, because it won't. In fact, it might be disadvantageous. They might look at it and say, well, gee, why is this person 25% less than everybody else we've talked to? So just be ready for that real number. It's usually a short conversation. It's usually a rip the Band-Aid off the hairy hand. It's get it over and done with, and then that's it. It's not a negotiation at that point either. It's more fact finding. You might be surprised. You might say, I'm looking for 70, and they might come back and offer you 85. Not likely, but it could happen. But it's no one's favorite question. No one likes asking that either. Trust me, I hate asking that question. I was raised with the belief that people shouldn't talk about their personal finances with other people. It's hard to shake that. So anyhow, we have run long. I'd love to continue, but I know everybody has other things and places to be. So I'm going to hand it back to Michael for any wrap up, and I'll look forward to getting my information to you all by email. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it and enjoy talking about this stuff with you.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Isaac. Thank you. That was amazing. And it's so easy to talk about interviews all day. I mean, there's so many things to talk about. There's hundreds of questions out there. I mean, we didn't even talk about those questions like, what kind of animal would you be? Or true story, I've heard this one. If you could choose a condiment, which one would you be? Ketchup, mustard, or relish? And how to answer stuff like that. But here's the thing. I like what you said, Isaac, about it's not about how you answer or what the question was, but it's how you made them feel.
Mhm.
And you know what? Sometimes it's not a fit. And if it doesn't feel like a good fit and you don't get the job because of that, then don't beat yourself up about it, right? Just move on and go on to the next thing. So here's what we're going to do. Even though there's lots of things that we could still talk about with interviews, we are still open at Career Connection here, and we're here to help you out with anything from resumes to interview skills to even job searching. We set you up with a career coach one-to-one, and we can talk to you over the phone or online. And all you need to do is just register online at mycareerconnection.ca. So just go on to the website, click on the registration button, and then we can figure out a time that you can meet up with a career coach. Now, what we are doing the rest of this month of April is we're having all these webinars with community leaders and with organizations throughout the city so that you can grow those skills, so that you can learn and that you can understand about the job market these days. So you never know what kinds of ideas and information will click with you. And that's what's going to take you to a new level in your job search. So tomorrow, let me quickly tell you about what's happening tomorrow. So I recorded a Q&A session with Karen Blackmer, who is the workforce consultant with Alberta Labor. And she gathers data and info from companies all over Alberta in various industries like tech and transportation, warehousing, and supply chain and more. So we talked about these industries and also just about networking. So I'll play the recording for you tomorrow, but Karen's also going to be live to answer any questions that you might have answered, or you might have after. So come out to that one. That one's going to be another great one. And I wanted to put this date on your radar as well, May 7th, which is Career Boost 2020. And what we're doing is we're putting together a bunch of employers who are actually hiring. I mean, it might sound like there's lots of layoffs going on out there right now and nobody's hiring, but there are companies out there. Calgary isn't shut down yet. Well, let's not say yet, but Calgary isn't shut down and things are still moving. Companies are hiring, things are growing. So we're putting together an exhibitors fair that's going to be online, and you can talk with all of these companies and get some more information about how you can possibly join their team and maybe even get those interviews and put into practice those things that Isaac talked about today. So everyone, thank you so much for coming out. Isaac, thank you so much for all that information. That was a lot of stuff, but I mean, you're the pro, like we said, and that's why I'm so happy that you're able to come out. My name is Michael Manzano. I'm with Career Connection at Bow Valley College. Everybody, stay safe, stay strong, and you know what? We'll get through this together. Thanks again, everyone, and you take care. We'll see you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everybody.